Welcome to the October 9th meeting of the Spokane Liberty Lake Planning Commission. A point of personal privilege here. Let's, instead of doing the roll call, let's do the pledge first, and then we'll do the roll call. So would you join me in the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We'll now have our roll call, please. Here. Here. Here.
Garcia. Here. Charlie Jenks. Bill Robbins. Bill Boyer.
Here.
Here. John Mullen.
Here. Thank you for being here. I'll entertain a motion to excuse Commissioner Jenks and also Commissioner Robbins. Do I have a motion, please?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And opposed. Thank you. We'll move on to general business, review the agenda. Are there any changes or omissions on the agenda from anyone? Entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
Move to approve the agenda.
Second. Thank you. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Everybody have a chance to review the minutes from September 11th. Entertain a motion to approve those minutes, please.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor of approval of the minutes from September 11th, please say aye.
Aye.
And opposed. Thank you. Follow-up questions reference September 11th meeting.
Yeah, so I wanted to, I had the opportunity to watch your meeting since I was not available for it. And I wanted to respond to a few questions that arose at that meeting. So if I may, I'm just going to take a few minutes to respond. So the question, the first question was, how much did the logo development cost? It cost $800. Can we have a more detailed schedule with dates? We absolutely hope that we will. And the reason why we don't at this point is because there's still moving parts and pieces related to the population allocation, the housing allocation, and that is essential to land quantity analysis. Everything we do going forward, everything from climate to land use, to transportation, to facilities, to parks and rec, all tie back to those numbers. We have to get that piece done first. We are making some progress, and it looks like we may have the county commissioners or the steering committee of elected officials make recommendations to the county commissioners. They may have the housing allocations recommended for approval by December. Now, but we're still having some issues with the allocation tool that that Commerce has provided, and we're trying to get some clarification on that. So that may slip to January, and that's just that's where it is. That we're and that's the big piece. It's really hard to predict all these others. The other thing that I'm waiting on is, and we'll talk about it later in the agenda, this commission indicated a willingness to contemplate 2 meetings a month in 2025. And I'd like to get a commitment on those dates. And that will give me the ability, but those 2 pieces, we can start putting together a more detailed schedule. And I know that it's frustrating from your side. Trust me, if you saw what was happening behind the curtain, you'd know how frustrating it is from our side also. There was also a question, can we standardize a time for outreach meetings? I would actually recommend that we don't do that. One of the great strategies, if you want to reach people that typically don't participate is you have to be flexible. For some people, Saturday morning is way easier than an evening meeting, sometimes during the day as well. And so trying to mix up the times that we do this has the potential to actually expand the pool of people that we can reach. And so that would be, so my recommendation would be to not do that. Can we look at amending the ordinance that establishes the planning commission? We absolutely can, and can I respectfully request that we wait until after the comp plan? But I think that it's, that may be August of, or July or August of 2026 that we'll get it on our agenda. How's
Perfect,
that?
as long as it's on the agenda.
And how much of the comp plan budget is earmarked for engagement? Now, a couple things I have to say. First of all, we don't have a comp plan budget. I have a budget for my department. Most of what we're doing is budget. It has to do with staff time, and so that's just typical of our budget. We do have some parts and pieces of this that are grant funded, and there are specific deliverables. Both of our grants related to the comp plan are deliverables based, so it's not really a scope of work. It's they'll give us so much based upon when we reach these deliverables. So engagement is kind of embedded in that. I do have some capital projects specifically for the Parks and Recreation Master Plan is in the capital facilities plan, as is the network analysis for the transportation piece. We do have some money proposed in the budget for on-call planning services to help with some specific parts and pieces of some of the elements. And of course, we have a contract for the climate chapter because we do have a grant for that. And it's an actually hefty grant. So the other thing is that our council only approves a budget once a year. This is a 2.5-year project. So do I have a comp plan budget? No, I do not. Do I try and encompass what I believe it's going to take in the planning, in the PEBS budget that we present to city council? Yes, I do. But in the interest of transparency, I did want to share with you just a couple slides related to the grants. Evan, can you go to the next slide, please? So first, this is the budget for the budget for engagement in the PUG grant. I've highlighted, again, keep in mind, the grant is deliverables based. They basically said, so propose 12 deliverables and split up the money amongst them.
Plug an acronym for.
Oh, a periodic update grant. That's what Commerce calls it.
Periodic update grant.
Okay, good
Okay.
point. The acronym is PUG. Anyhow, be that as it may, we do have $6,250 that we will get reimbursed once we provide them with the public engagement plan. That is presumably it didn't take us that much to produce it. So those funds can actually go for it. But you see all the other elements all the other deliverables we have, there's a public engagement component in being able to deliver every single one of those. So, again, I don't have a specific comp plan budget, but this is the grant money that we're going to get spread over 2.5 years. Next slide, please. Actually, it's spread over 2 years. We also have a grant for our climate planning. And we received a grant for, well, we didn't receive it. We were awarded a grant for $500,000 to do the climate planning that is required by the new legislation. This is a hefty budget because this is very science laden. It's split over to biennium again. And there is 100,000 of it that we are actually reserving for implementation. Now, it is a planning grant, so it would be planning. But if, for example, one of the recommendations out of climate resiliency was to develop a more robust, hazard mitigation plan, or to develop a more robust, plan as it relates to wildfire, evacuations or whatnot. We could use 100,000 to do that. So that's what, that's what this is about. As you can see, we have about 100,000 that we are reimbursed once we provide these deliverables, the draft engagement and tribal engagement plan and the final engagement plan. But the reality is that we're going to be doing engagement throughout the process. So the concept is it's embedded in the grant. I just wanted to share that with you in the interest of transparency. The other thing I do want to just kind of remind the Planning Commission is that the budget is not really within the purview of the Planning Commission, but again, in the interest of transparency. Next slide, please. So the
Just
other,
back up. Whose responsibility is it to ensure these grant funds are received?
so that is the responsibility of staff. And so we work
With
with,
planning staff or finance staff or?
well, we work together on it.
Okay.
If finance staff actually submits for the reimbursement.
Okay.
But we're providing them with the documents so that they can, and we are working together to make sure we're in compliance.
Yes, this takes time.
It does take time. It absolutely does. And one of the things we don't have a lot of. The last question that was asked was one, what would be the impact of our not complying with the state regulations? Well, as we've said several times, probably the most significant from the carrot side of the equation is grants. And I can't tell you what grants we won't receive in the coming years, but I can tell you how the grants that we've received since 2016, which was when the last comp plan period was updated. And it's to the tune of, if we include the pending library construction grant, which has been recommended for approval by Commerce. Now the legislature still has to act on it, but typically if it's recommended by Commerce, it gets awarded as part of the budget process. Longest story short is that we're looking at almost $6 million just since 2016 in grants. Now that's the carrot side, but I want to talk about the stick side for a second. The flip side of it is if we are not complying with state law, we could get sued. And I can't tell you what the order of magnitude of cost that would be if we were sued and had to go before the Growth Management Board, or it had to go before the state court. In either case, what I can say is that since I've been here, I've had 4 cases that have been appealed to the hearing examiner. And each time we had attorney's fees totaling more than 20,000. I can only, if we actually had to go to the Growth Management Board, or that it was appealed to the state court, we're talking about orders of magnitude way more than that. And so it's not just that it's a good thing to do. We have an obligation to follow state law. And so, and the consequences to the taxpayers are not inconsequential. So that is the answer to all the questions you asked last time, at least all the ones that I gleaned from your meeting. So, and I just really wanted to follow up with y'all. You asked good questions. Hopefully I've given you some food for thought.
Anybody have further questions? Yes,
Can you add the PUG to our abbreviations list?
I certainly could.
And the other thing I'd like to ask, what is the planning budget for staffing? And are you folks staffed appropriately?
We are staffed at the maximum that we have seating capacity for. In a perfect world, I'd like 3 more staff, honestly. But but until we figure out what we're doing with facilities and have some place for them to sit, we have what we have.
Okay, so with that said, because it appears you just said there's no room for them to sit. I know you're providing good work. Thank you, everybody, for providing the good work. It could, if you were to share offices, if you don't already, could that staffing be increased sooner? So that not only are you preparing good work, lots of work, it's not impacting the timing and so much backlog. Would that be helpful? And how do we maximize that? Could people work from home? That could help in some of that.
So
staffing?
that's what the facilities master plan that council, or that, we're working on right now. With Ben Turner on board, we are doing a facilities master plan. We're trying to figure out how we can maximize the space. In fact, I just gave the, architects a tour of the building here at City Hall this morning. We're gonna have another round with them, talking about what, we've done some facility, surveys in terms of what our ideal staffing looks like, what we could do. We do share offices right now, DG, to the extent that we can. This is a very inefficient building, super inefficient. It really was not designed to be a city hall. And I've got my, two permit techs sitting on top of each other in one office. I've got 3 plans examiners, building inspectors that share one office. We do, to the extent that we can. The offices are not really large enough to share with, and we also need meeting space.
Right. I just want you all to have everything that you need. Doesn't mean I'm gonna be on the planning commission for everything, but this window of opportunity, if ever we can make it, the planning department needs to be full staff, really ready to go, because things can get put back in the hopper. So I'm just saying, on your behalf, I'm just
Thank
saying,
you.
if we can, whatever we need to do, let's do it, because this is a unit that takes care of what we're gonna be doing outside in the universe here.
And that is why we have on-call planning contract, an on-call engineering contract, and an on-call building plan review contract, so that we can balance workload to the best of our ability. It's still not ideal, but we have outlets to flex when workload gets crazy.
Good.
Crazier maybe.
No, good. Thank you for providing.
Thank you.
Lisa, can I ask a follow-up question?
Sure.
Your suggestion of needing more staff, is that statement a result of the implementation of this climate element for our comp plan? Or is that other related tasks that your department does?
Other related tasks, just from a building standpoint, the building and development standpoint, I really need 3 permit techs. I'm probably good on building inspectors and plans examiners, but I probably also need an EIT in addition to the city engineer.
The reason I asked the question is, it was my understanding that this grant was to farm out that task.
And that task has been farmed out, and so we have a consultant on board, and they're actually going to be presenting today. But as you are well aware, there's still a level of staff involvement with just even managing a contract.
Oh, sure, I get it. I
And
just
so-
wanted to
so-
clarify, because I
Yes,
didn't want
yes.
anybody to leave thinking, oh, Lisa needs 2 or 3 more because of this climate piece, and I don't.
It's
think
no,
you're
and
saying
and I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that if you're asking me what would be,
Right.
what
Understood.
would be the staffing level that would actually make us efficient and not have us all running around with our hair on fire, that would be it.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you. We'll move on from there to our workshops. First workshop
Next slide.
is
please.
climate element.
And we have online Beth Miller with Parametrics, who is leading this task for us. And Evan, if you could load up her presentation. Thank you.
Hello.
Hi, Beth.
Do we have a copy of her presentation?
No, but but we can send it to you after the meeting.
Fine, okay.
Right. Well, thank you. Are you ready for me?
We are.
Begin. All right. Sounds good. Thank you so much for taking time to review this. I just wanted to say at the beginning, I'm going to be going through sort of technical quantitative analysis of this, and I want to invite you to raise your hand and ask questions, or whatever the question asking format is that's best for this room. But I think it will help in the understanding. So if you need something clarified, please let me know so we don't, back it up at the very end. So also there's plenty of time for sort of more substantive, like, why are we doing this? Like, how does this relate to that kind of questions too at the end. So during the talk at the end, please ask me any questions that you have. Yeah, so next slide. Next slide. All right, so I'm just starting with a little, what is the climate element in this situation? So as Lisa already talked about, Washington State now requires planning for climate change in the comprehensive planning process. There's two sub-elements, the GHG emissions reduction sub-element, and then the resilience sub-element. Communities are also required to advance environmental justice and avoid environmental health disparities in their completion of this plan. So these are mandatory elements. The greenhouse gas emissions inventory is also one of the mandatory elements, and that is what we're going to talk about today. And then next slide, please. So just to give you an idea of the whole process here and where we are, the sort of top line of these arrows is the GHG emissions sub-element. And we have completed the GHG inventory, which I am going to explain to you today. And then we're going to take the results of that to identify emissions reduction targets and incorporate those into some goals and policies that will then be integrated into the total comprehensive plan. And so at the same time, another group of my colleagues is going through and doing the resilience sub-element, which is assessing all the sort of climate-related environmental hazards, things like that, that you might be facing in the future. So in November's Planning Commission meeting, you'll hear more about that. Next slide, please. Next slide. All right, so what is a GHG greenhouse gas inventory? So basically, this is just an accounting of greenhouse gases emitted to or removed from the atmosphere during a specified period for some organization or geographic boundary. So in this case, it's the geographic boundary of Liberty Lake for the year 2022. And so we are just trying to understand every source and sink of emissions in Liberty Lake. Greenhouse gases are in large part from the combustion of fossil fuels. So that's your natural gas, your gasoline, your diesel, your propane. But there's also a few other sources like refrigerants and wastewater treatment that also can have sort of outsized impact, even for small amounts of emissions. And so in this table on the side, I'm just listing out the different greenhouse gases that we are including in this inventory. So the big one, obviously, is carbon dioxide, chemical formula CO2, and this global warming potential is the sort of, everything is going to be compared to carbon dioxide. So the effect that carbon dioxide has in the atmosphere, trapping heat and warming the planet. So, is the mic not doing great? Let's see. How about this mic? Is this better?
Yes.
Okay, I'll use that one instead. Thank you for letting me know. So other greenhouse gases are methane, and this one is quite a bit more potent, right? 1 ton of methane has the same effect as 28 tons of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. There's a few more other gases, nitrous oxide, and then there's these other sort of weird ones, chlorofluorocarbons, hydrofluorocarbons, sodium hexafluoride, that are released in much lower amounts, but have much higher, much stronger effects on the atmosphere. So we normalize everything to carbon dioxide so that we can compare across all the different sources. And the point of this inventory is to provide a baseline. It's a means to track the good things that you do in the future and set goals and understand what is important and what is not, and where you should focus, what's going to be cost effective, where the bang for your buck is. So the point of these inventories is not to say, oh, this community is bad or this community is good. It's just it's sort of internally to allow a community to understand where it started so it can plan out where to go. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so all the things that are included, we sort of try to wrap our arms around the whole community and look at all the different sources. So this is 2022. Everything that happens within your geographic boundary, we're following the Washington State Department of Commerce's requirements. So it's going to have any agriculture. You don't have a lot of agriculture in your city, but any stationary fuel combustion. So that is your natural gas to heat your house, for example, any industrial processes, any transportation within the boundary, any waste that you generate within the boundary, and then also all of the electricity that is generated for you to use in your homes and your businesses in town. And then there's also sort of all the things that happen on your behalf. So the emissions generated because you paid for them or because you sent your waste elsewhere. So all of those too are included in this inventory, and we make an effort to sort of delineate which ones are sort of in boundary and which ones are coming from outside. But it also includes just things like all the stuff that you buy and the production of the food that you eat, all that kind of stuff. Oh, and also I wanted to note also the sort of the emissions involved in building the city in the first place. So the conversion of rangeland to city is also included in this inventory. Any questions?
Yes.
Well, question kind of goes back. I'm sorry. You said there's no good or bad with respect to the inventory, but are there benchmarks?
Yeah. So I'll show you sort of a comparison with the state as a whole. And different. The thing is that different communities have such different things going on, right? They have different weather, they have different industries, so it's sort of hard to understand to compare really well across different cities. But I'll show you the comparison to the state as a whole, like the per capita emissions of the state. All right. So the next, I just want to clarify this term that you will hear a million times in this presentation, which is a metric ton of CO2e. So that's a metric ton of carbon dioxide equivalent. Like we were talking about all those different gases, they all get added up to be a carbon dioxide equivalent. And 1 metric ton is of roughly the size of a house. And it's equivalent to, just to give you a sense of scale, a passenger vehicle being driven for 2,500 miles, about 13% of an average US home's energy use for a year, 46 propane cylinders for your barbecue, or the carbon sequestered by 1.2 acres of forest per year. So just to sort of have it in your mind, like what is the scale here? What are we talking about? Right. So next, sort of drum roll, please. So these are your sort of overall emissions for the year of 2022. 258,000 metric tons CO2e. And I have this graph sort of divided into these, the local emissions versus imported emissions. So the local emissions are, really things that happen in Liberty Lake. So the electricity and natural gas to light and heat your house, for example, that's included in the building energy column, which is your biggest source. Transportation energy, cars on the road, trucks on the road, waste disposal, things that go to the landfill, things that go to the sewage treatment plant, a little bit of industrial processes and refrigerants, but here it's entirely refrigerants for your community. So just the usage of your refrigerator, your AC, your car's AC, the refrigerators in the grocery store, that kind of stuff. And then a little tiny bit from agriculture, forestry, and land use. And that's just fertilizer use and the original development of the city. And then the imported emissions are sort of the things that happen outside of town on your behalf. So the production of goods, like all the stuff that you buy, all the food that you buy, all the upstream drilling and processing of your fuel that you use, and then also all the air travel that is sort of attributed to your town. Yes.
Good question.
So the inventory is done?
Yeah.
It's completed?
Uh-huh.
Okay, are there any, within the inventory, are there any credits for land that has been used for sequestering carbon? Are there any credits for any solar that's been put in? Are these all net numbers or gross numbers?
Yeah, so things like solar for sure gets included because what that ends up doing is just decreasing your electricity usage. And in terms of like carbon sequestration locally, are you talking about tree growth?
Yes.
Yes. There's not a whole lot of that, although we've talked about that a little bit more. And I think it might be good to I don't have like a number for you of exactly how much tree growth is included. I know from other inventories, it is sadly minuscule, unless there's a giant forest in the middle of your community. But I've heard that, and I think I'll include that just to make sure that it is counted. So heard, will include.
I have a follow-up question there.
Mm-hmm.
So am I hearing you say that you're capturing the solar credit in the building energy usage?
Yes.
So
Yes.
You're not capturing anybody that produces more than they use and it goes back to the grid.
So we get our data for energy usage directly from Avista. So they tell us how much they sold and they use net metering. So if someone is using more than they supply, if someone is supplying more than they use in town, that's probably just gonna show as like a negative sale. But I can look in and ask Avista if they have any such customers in town. The other thing that will do overall is decrease everybody's emissions factor. Right, so Avista, well, and we'll get to this. I've got like many slides of detail on this, but Avista reports their electricity production mix. So that solar goes into their like total electricity production mix. And so the more solar you produce, the lower the emissions of everybody else's electricity, because they're using, if you're net selling to the grid, then everybody else is buying a little bit of your solar production. Does that make sense?
Is Avista still giving credit back for solar?
No.
I didn't think so.
Beth, would you do me a favor? And
Sure.
I'm in touch with Avista pretty regularly, and I put out about 6 times the amount of energy that I use and
Okay.
do not measure it. And I've asked them, I've gone up to the executive level, so be careful when you're giving us Avista information that you're getting the accurate information.
So, okay, so you know.
They don't
that you
measure it.
should do-
If they don't measure it, then they're not going to be giving you accurate data, okay?
Okay.
And there are
So-
others, and we're having quite a bit of building in the River District that includes solar. And
Mhm.
it's not being calculated, and it is not being measured as a community, let alone as an individual, and there is no incentive.
I didn't think so. And the reason why I bring it up is
Mhm.
new energy codes that we deal with on housing, everybody's gonna have solar panels on their house at some point. And if you're not taking into consideration what that's generating back to that utility company, then your information is a little skewed, in my opinion.
Mhm.
I would say unless you're getting a net number from Avista.
Exactly.
This is a great conversation and I want you to keep that thought, because when we get eventually talking about policies, those may be some of the policies that we're actually bringing forward.
And I do want to clarify that what Avista gives us is net. So they tell us how much they sold, netted out with how much they get. So, if you, what I don't know is how they handle, net generators who don't end up paying for their electricity. That I don't know, and that's a really good point, and I will ask Avista. But I do know if you had a solar panel that did not cover your total electricity usage, then that solar would just be subtracted from your electricity usage.
That's accurate as to how much they're charging us. That is not accurate as to how much we are giving and improving, okay?
Mhm, mhm,
All that they're giving you is billing information.
mhm. Okay. Okay. Always exciting to learn the ins and outs of different utilities.
Gigi's raising her hand, please.
Yeah.
Hi, Beth. I have a question. Some of the information that you're getting from the commissioners are well worth entertaining, having, if it is permissible, having a consult where such individual who's providing that information in real time can actually answer those questions and somehow fulfill what right now you don't have available to you. Your questions would be going back to them and you'd be bringing it back to us. Is there a possibility that a few of the commissioners could meet at the exact same time that you're vetting these questions and getting these answers? Because what we put out there, what we put out in the universe that people are supposed to rely on, we want to have it like right on target with what you have. Is that a possibility that you would entertain, or Lisa could help facilitate a couple of the commissioners privileged to be in that meeting where you're vetting these so you can get the questions? answered appropriately?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of a question of schedule juggling at that point. But yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, we still have some scope left on this task, so I am happy to throw it at doing that. That sounds like a really good thing to get ironed out. So,
Maybe we'll vote on 2 individuals or so going to such meeting so we can vet those in. You're wonderful. I thank you in advance.
thank you.
You're welcome.
All right.
Beth, I have a couple of questions as well. I'm a much more basic thinker. How is this data collected and how is it measured and where?
Yeah, that is a really good question. And we are spending a lot of time on this slide. And I will tell you that in 2 more slides, I'm going to go through sort of step by step how each one of these data points is collected and like where's our data from and what are we doing that. So could I ask you to ask me that again in a couple slides? And you can set me up for that.
I'll be patient.
Thank you. Anything else? All right, I am going to move on to the next slide, which is a comparison slide. So this is showing Liberty Lake's per person emissions compared to the state of Washington. And so unfortunately, the state of Washington, I had to use their 2019 per person emissions for all these things so that to find an inventory where they broke it down in a way that I could compare it nicely. But you can see it sort of gives you an idea of where you're sitting compared to the rest of the state. So so somewhat lower than the state on average per person, but a somewhat higher residential emissions, quite a bit lower transportation emissions than the state on average. And those, so a lot of those emissions come from that electricity emissions factors driving up your residential emissions. And then sort of to explain how you could be, so much lower on average, but higher in these key sectors. So Liberty Lake is mostly residential, right? There's not a whole lot of big, silicon chip manufacturers or like big dairy farms or things like that that would come with a whole lot of emissions. So, so this is just to sort of give you a sense of how that compares to the rest of the state. And then the next slide, please, is another way to think about how all of your emissions sort of break down compared to each other. And so now we're just looking at the local emissions. So not all of those, the things that you buy kind of emissions, but this is the in-town emission sources. So, about 2/3 comes from building energy. And a lot of that is from, just people's houses, your residential energy usage. Some of it is from commercial with a much smaller portion from industrial. 1/4 goes to transportation, mostly passenger vehicles, pretty usual. And then a little bit left for refrigerants and wastewater. Oh, and we did make some attempt to quantify golf carts just to sort of understand their role in the community. Okay. So in this next slide, I'm going to start getting into the different sectors. So we're going to start with building energy because that's the biggest one, and go through where we get that data, how we count it up, and sort of give a little bit more insight into the different sources. Okay, so building energy, this is any energy used in buildings. So lights, heating and cooling, appliances, basically anything coming into your building. This also includes so electricity, natural gas, and then a little bit of propane and diesel and things like that. So most of this building energy is in electricity. So like we talked about a little bit, the way that we got this this data, both for electricity and for natural gas, is just calling up Avista and saying, hey, how many kilowatt hours did you sell in Liberty Lake in 2022? And how many therms of natural gas did you sell in Liberty Lake in 2022? So that is where we get our data from. And solar, when it's net metered, decreases your usage, so then decreases those kilowatt hours that you buy. We also included any renewable energy credits that anybody in town bought from Avista. So these are basically paying extra to use a kind of a financial mechanism to get renewable electricity. So that gets subtracted from the total. And then any energy, so we also estimate for the transportation section how much electricity is used in electric vehicles. So that electricity gets subtracted from the building energy and added to the transportation section. For natural gas, it's a little bit more straightforward. It's like I said, hey Avista, how much natural gas did you sell? And then we just assume that all of that is burned. So we're not estimating natural gas leaks or things like that, although we also include sort of a system-wide natural gas leakage rate, because there's a little bit of leakage that happens, things like that. So that's a little bit different, because once you burn natural gas, which is methane, once you burn it, it becomes CO2, which is less potent in the atmosphere than any natural gas that leaks, which is methane, which is about 28 times more potent than carbon dioxide.
Hey, question.
Yeah.
How does Liberty Lake Water and Sewer are they included in this inventory?
They are, yes.
And does Liberty Lake, do they generate anything, or are they just a user?
They do use let me think. I don't remember if we included them separately as natural gas users.
Because they're not industry, they're not residential, they're a utility.
They're a utility, yeah. So that's sort of up to the utility that they when they report it back to us. They include everything, but some utilities like to put other utilities as industrial, and some of them put them as commercial. But their usage is included in that whole big chunk of usage. And I honestly just trying to see if I've got.
Lisa, would they be a partner in this exercise?
I have it separately.
Oh, what?
I have it separately as Liberty Lake Water and Sewer District, their kilowatt hours of electricity and their therms of natural gas that they purchase. I'm just pulling up my spreadsheet in front of me. Yeah, so yeah, they are included separately, but as their own line of a user.
So then the question I have for Lisa, would they be a partner in this exercise?
Well, so we did collect some data from them as it relates to their operations, because it's located within the boundaries of the city.
But as far as meeting targets and goals?
Eventually, yes, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. When we get to that part, right now, we're just, we're just collecting data on what we're generating, so we can start setting goals.
Absolutely, absolutely. But good thinking. Okay, and then the last little chunk of building energy is just propane and diesel and other sort of, diesel for your generator and propane for your barbecue. And that is not direct Liberty Lake data. That is from the state of Washington, estimates all that usage, and then we just downscale that per capita for Liberty Lake.
So Beth, Phil Foyer had a question.
So just an observation on how you captured the EV portion and transferred it over to your transportation. That information came from Avista, correct?
The electricity usage came from Avista.
And the only thing that they're going to be able to provide is any standalone charging stations And the reason why I'm bringing this up is with these new code changes that we're dealing with. Every new home is required to have a 50 amp circuit for an EV charging station for a car, whether you have one or not. So I realize that falls under the electricity usage, but it seems to me the goal here is to reduce emissions, and that's part of the push for EVs. So your end result on taking EV electricity usage and moving it over to transportation is not going to be able to be captured if you're doing it at home.
So I should clarify a little bit. So Avista does not tell us what it's EV charging. So that is estimated separately based on our in our transportation work. So for that, we use the number of registered EVs in Liberty Lake to estimate the EV electricity usage. So you are right. It is very hard to capture exactly how much electricity is used by EVs, for sure. The electricity used by EVs is captured, and we make an attempt to split it out appropriately into transportation. But you're right that probably that split is not perfect. But we're not like double counting EV electricity or undercounting EV electricity. What might be the case is that we are like putting a little bit too much or a little bit not enough from buildings into transportation. Does that make sense?
Yep, thank you.
Okay.
Although you're only able to do it by registration, not by number of charges. I mean, somebody has an EV and they drive 6,000, 7,000 miles a year versus somebody that drives 20,000 miles a year. There's no good way to capture that.
Absolutely, you're right. There's not.
Yeah, okay.
So this is an exercise in the possible and an exercise in trying to do it in such a way that when you do it again, you can do it the same way.
Understood. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Next slide, please. Okay. All right. So here I'm showing how building energy breaks down among the residential, commercial, and industrial users, and the usage of natural gas versus electricity within that. So that's showing on the left is, so you can see that most of the energy usage is in homes, and then also a big portion in commercial. And then the other thing that this is showing you on the right is looking at, so we talked a little bit about this already, but looking at the emissions intensity of the electricity that you are using, or rather that Avista is selling to you. And Avista is more or less on par with the regional grid, the Northwest Power Pool, which is generally quite a bit lower than the US average. So who has access to, the BPA, Bonneville Power, hydropower depends a lot on like who owns the utility. So Avista is relatively low compared to other private utilities, so other investor-owned utilities in the state. So that's why I say Avista Energy is pretty much in line with the regional grid average. Any questions on your building emissions?
We're good.
Okay, well, let's move on to transportation. We already sort of talked about the most confusing part about transportation, which is EVs, but that's all right. So transportation energy, like a quarter of your total local emissions.
includes any energy that fuels transportation. So this is passenger cars and this is freight. And then a little bit of transit. There's not a whole lot of, there's no significant rail, so we did not include that in this inventory. But then we also like tried to get an estimate of golf carts and an estimate of sort of off-road vehicles. So passenger cars, this is absolutely the most complicated one to estimate. And the reason is that when people drive their cars, they cross boundaries. So what do you count? Do you count that whole trip? Do you just count any wheels on roads like within your boundary? Do you count? There's a whole lot of different ways to count this, but in this case, and to better align with the state's goals, which include vehicle miles traveled in your community, we estimated vehicle miles traveled within the community boundary. And we used, because there was a delay in getting the county level VMT estimates, we used a software called Replica that uses cell phone data to sort of track all of the trips within a boundary. And so so basically what you can do is draw a boundary on a map for Liberty Lake, and then they will estimate the vehicle miles traveled for a typical weekday and a typical weekend day in a given year. So that is what we used to estimate the vehicle miles traveled. And then to get at, okay, that's nice, but what are the emissions associated with it? We used car registration data to see, okay, how many of the cars registered in Liberty Lake? Again, like we don't really have an idea of whether this car was driven more than that car, but it's a stab at it. So then we can get an idea of how many gas cars, how many diesel cars, how many electric cars are in the population of cars in Liberty Lake. And then we use the Department of Energy fuel efficiency estimates to convert those vehicle miles traveled to emissions, or to fuel usage, then to emissions. So that's how we get our transportation emissions for, cars on your roads. Spokane Transit just told us how much fuel they used, and we prorated that by service population. Golf carts, this was kind of a fun one. So we basically called up the golf courses and asked them, how many carts do you have? And can you give us an estimate of how much fuel you use? We also asked, are they electric or are they gas? And they were all told us that they were gas. So they gave us an estimate of their fuel budget. And so we calculated fuel use per golf cart based on that. And then we also included any golf carts registered with the city and used those same estimates because we could not get how many of those were gas versus electric. So do our best. And then finally, any off-road fuel usage. So this is lawnmowers and construction equipment and ATVs and those kinds of things. We estimated based on a statewide inventory and then just downscaled that data for Liberty Lake's population. All right. I know you have questions on this.
I'm not seeing any questions.
All right, well, let's look at the data. Flip to the next slide, please. Okay, so as is quite typical, like the lion's share of those transportation emissions are from passenger cars, and that makes total sense. There's a little bit transit, a little bit of freight. People always think that those giant semi trucks are the ones that are creating all the emissions, but no, it's the school drop-off line. And then a little bit also for golf carts. So any questions on transportation now?
Well, I guess at some point we'll talk about what are the factors that would increase or decrease the transportation energy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, so that is definitely going to be part of the like the sort of next step of this is trying to set targets and goals. I mean, things like passenger cars, right? That is vehicle miles traveled. That's how much you have to drive your car and what car you're driving. You know, so that's half how your city is laid out and like where things are and how people get there, and half what they're driving. I mean, I don't know. If
You
actually
didn't hear my
happens.
cynical comment. That's,
Hmm?
I said you could just turn off your cell phone when driving.
Well, that might fool Replica, but I don't think it'll fool those like little car counters on the highway. So
Never mind. Strike that.
okay. All right, we'll move on to the next thing. All right. We can always come back if you think of any more questions. All right, so the next slide is about waste and refrigerants. And this includes all the community refrigerant use, all the landfill waste, and all the wastewater treatment emissions. So refrigerants, as we mentioned, so this is your air conditioners, your cars, your refrigerators, industrial cooling. And this is hard data to get on an individual community level. So we use downscale data from the EPA's statewide estimates for Washington. So we downscaled based on population for Liberty Lake. Yeah, and then the next sector is solid waste. So this one, you just ask your garbage collection companies how much waste did they haul and where did they take it to. So they told us how many tons of waste and they took it to Greater Wenatchee landfill. And then the landfill has to report its emissions on its to the EPA. So then we can say they have to report their emissions and how much waste they took in. So then we could say, okay, what proportion of this landfill's waste came from Liberty Lake? And then, so then attribute the right proportion of those emissions to Liberty Lake. There's also a little bit of composting emissions. And this, I spent a little bit of time refreshing my memory on exactly how this works. So there are some emissions associated with composting, but they're much, much less, like 1% of what they would be if that material went into the landfill. So there's a little bit, but it's less than it would be. So composting ends up being a big win, but it still ends up in the emissions category. Finally, you got local and out-of-town wastewater treatment both, and we use to estimate this, we both use the EPA's community inventory tool. So they have a tool that they encourage communities to use to estimate their emissions of all sorts, but we find it particularly useful for their wastewater module. And these emissions come from N2O emissions and methane emissions. And, there's several factors that go into this. Basically, how many people are being treated at that wastewater treatment plant. And then, what is their process? Are they nitrifying and denitrifying? Are they doing anaerobic digestion? So we collect that data from the wastewater treatment plant to estimate those emissions.
Question for you. On the data from the EPA regarding refrigerants, is that related to production? Because I just can't believe that's leakage. Because any one of those products that you use for any of those you have listed, it's not like you just release it into the air, it's captured. The only time it gets away from anybody is when there's a leak. So did it express where that 3% came from? Because it
is mostly used.
I'm assuming.
Leakage. Yeah, and things like, so here's some big culprits of that is big, huge grocery stores, fridges. Right, so anytime you have to get your refrigerant recharged, that represents leakage that happened.
You're saying there's 3% leakage. Okay.
No. Sorry, good question. 3% of your total emissions for the city are due to refrigerant leakage. And again, these are really, really, really potent greenhouse gas chemicals. So even just like a tiny bit of leakage can have a really big atmospheric effect.
Thank you for clarifying. Appreciate it.
No problem. All right, last one, unless someone else has a question.
I was just gonna say, I'm not seeing any questions.
Okay. All right, so land use change. So we one big emission source often can be, if there's a lot of fertilizer use anywhere, that can end up being a really big source. And so we track this down and ask the golf courses how much fertilizer they use, and then that the nitrogen used in synthetic fertilizer can then gets emitted as N2O, a portion of it that doesn't get taken up by plants. So there's a little bit of fertilizer use emissions in there, and then also a little bit of original city development emissions. So what we did for this is we assumed the previous land area was rangeland, and then used emissions per acre, like EPA generated factors for what are the emissions involved with developing that sort of land, and then split that up over 20 years. So that's how far back you're supposed to look. And this is actually the last inventory that you will count this particular source. At some point, that gets grandfathered in and you don't count original development emissions anymore, but this is the last one that you'll count it for. So this is just a tiny little bit. This doesn't hardly registers in your overall emissions. All right, so the last emission source here are these imported emissions. So this is actually not required by Commerce, but we at Parametrics like to include it because it is actually a quite significant source of emissions that you have some control over as a city. So it's roughly half of your emissions. So roughly equal to all your local emissions are your imported emissions. And I'm using words like roughly and estimated here because to get these emissions, it's not like we went and asked, what food did this grocery store sell? This is based on emissions factors from the Berkeley Cool Climate Calculator. And those vary, like how many emissions per household vary by household income. So we use the US Census income distribution for Liberty Lake to estimate income, and then the Cool Climate Calculator to estimate the emissions associated per household. That, and then add it all up, and here we go. And so that's for food, goods, and air travel. Fuel production actually is based on fuel usage. So that's all your electricity production, like the mining involved in getting, or the fracking involved to make the natural gas that goes into your house and also into the power plant. So all that upstream stuff, the drilling involved to make your gasoline and diesel fuel. So that is all what's counted in that upstream fuel production, everything that happened up there. And then there's this little electricity transportation and distribution loss. So that's saying some electricity is lost on its there's inefficiency in its transport to you. So for every kilowatt hour that you use, there was a kilowatt hour there was some portion of a kilowatt hour that was generated to get that to you.
I'll just make a comment in terms of things that the city of Liberty, the things that we can do to impact CO2. I just don't see where we can have a lot of impact over imported emissions. Am I
I
not?
mean, it's sort of hard, and it is one of those things that clearly individuals, right? People's choices about how much and what they buy are what drive this. So Liberty Lake as a community does then have influence, right? Because people are choosing. Liberty Lake as a governmental entity, you know, maybe is not in the business of telling people what and how much to buy, but Liberty Lake as an educational opportunity may have some influence over helping people understand, you know, there's food waste goals, things like that can really make a difference.
Question. What all goes into the factoring for the items listed under goods? How detailed do you get in factoring that? Or
I mean, it's as detailed as you see here. So we use this Berkeley Cool Climate Calculator, and they have, this is how they split things up. So I couldn't necessarily go in and tell you more about, you know, what goes into different kinds of electronics, for example. But yeah, so that's basically what goes in. These are the different categories that model spits out.
I think I think maybe the question was misunderstood and I should clarify. As far as like the details and figuring out how much emissions are caused from the manufacturing of these different goods, how detailed does that get? I'm just curious. Are they factoring in things from the materials being used to manufacture these? Are they factoring in the employees' emissions to get to and from the factories? And like how much detail is going into that?
Yeah, that is such a good question. And I would have to say I don't have a good concept of how this particular model is factoring that in, but I will say that I have worked with other communities on these kinds of purchasing inventories to sort of get an idea. And there are these just like massive data sets where they have every single thing that you could think of. And someone has put like years of their life into calculating, you know, all of the little bits and pieces and tracing that back all the way to the source. So I have to, I mean, I don't know this for sure, but if I was setting this up, that is how I would use those big, huge input output models, they're called, to then generate the factors for each of these categories of things. So that's all to say, yeah, I expect that it goes all the way back, but I don't know for certain. It would be best practices to go all the way back. But I could direct you to this Cool Climate Calculator, and also to that they've got like a paper where they explain all of their methodology. So I can send that along to you if you're interested in that.
Yeah, for sure. I was just curious because I mean you can start going in cycles then too, because furniture you're getting parts for the furniture, then you're having to factor that in. So I was just kind of curious, you know, how far back does that go? And it's just kind of a rolling thing, like you're saying, that they think of everything, but did they think of where that material came from and how much emissions were for that material and where did it come from and where was it sourced and all of that? I mean, that sounds like an impossible thing to come up with an exact figure that they're going off of.
It is a Herculean task, and like each number sort of represents a PhD's thesis of doing to figure that out. And I will say that I want you to look at this not as sort of a precise thing, because this is not what Liberty Lake buys. right? This is not based on you in particular. So the idea of including these emissions are really to give you a sense of scale of how important these kinds of emissions are, and to sort of point your thinking towards places where you can make a difference. So that is really the goal, not to get a very precise estimate here, because that is a wild task.
Right. Perfect.
Way out of scope for this project.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Another question, since all of this data is actually either calculated or estimated,
Mhm, mhm.
what's the margin of error?
This one, I would say the margin of error is pretty high. For these emission sources. But for things like your electricity emissions, as long as we nail down exactly what emissions, exactly which kilowatt hours they're telling us about, that should be very low, right? That should be a very low margin of error. You know, that's how many kilowatt hours, and they know exactly how they produced it. Same thing with natural gas. You know, a therm of natural gas is a therm of natural gas, and they know how much they sold you because they want to charge you for it. So those kinds of things, there's pretty low margins of errors, but for the transportation, that's a much higher margin of error, because it really is just an estimate of VMT, and then an estimate of fuel usage, and then that gets to the emissions. So the deeper the estimation gets, the more error there is on that. And I would say that the point of this inventory is really to help guide you in thinking of sense of scale. Like where should we really focus? Because in this world of doing all this kind of climate action, there are so many little things that people are like, oh, get rid of your straws, and just all these things that it's hard to sort through all the millions of things and to look at the things that actually matter. So that is the goal here, not to be perfectly precise, but to point you in the right direction and allow you to track progress over time.
Beth, that's exactly what I wanted to add on to this, to your comments a little bit, is that there's a couple things happening with this climate element. A big part of it is absolutely going to be education. But we're going to want to set some policies and some targets. The beauty of the baseline analysis, if we use the same methodology, we should be able to track our progress. And so even if some of the data sources have a huge margin of error, and others have a very limited margin of error, it's going to be using the exact same process. We'll be able to measure in 5 years if we're doing better. And that, I think, is most important outcome of this, is being able to wrap our arms around where we are right now, so that we can target some things that we can do going into the future and track our progress.
Yeah. Fully agreed. Thank you, Lisa. Okay, so the next slide here, unless you have any more questions on this, because that's confusing, but I wanna make sure that we get through this, but you guys have had so many good questions. Okay, so this is our emissions forecast. So what this is showing on the left, I have metric ton CO2e per year. So the leftmost margin where all those lines meet are this 2022 inventory. And then it goes out through time, which estimates emissions through time up through 2050. The red line is saying, what would these emissions look like? What would the total sum of the emissions look like if nothing changed at all and you just grew like you expect to grow, which is pretty fast. And then the yellow line is the net zero by 2050 goal, which is necessary to prevent it's necessary for everybody to reach to prevent the worst effects of global warming. Okay, and then each of these sort of colored swaths is looking at the emissions associated with a given emissions source. Okay, so this looks a little funky, right? You've got this green electricity, I don't know, it looks like a dolphin or something, sort of rising a little bit and then going down. And so what I've done here is put in all of the different policies that are state or federal policies that are law that people have to follow, and estimated how that is going to affect emissions through time. So electricity is affected by Washington's clean energy targets, which is requiring electricity emissions to go to zero by 2040. 2045, in fact, sorry, that's wrong. And so you can see that what's happening there is that electricity emissions go up a little bit as your population rises quite quickly, but then it goes down to zero as the emissions factor of your electricity goes to zero. The next line is passenger cars, and you can see that that line is also sort of narrowing out through time, and that's due to the EV car requirements. The next one is the orange one, which is based on the state of Washington's HFC rules, which phase out those really high GWP refrigerants. And then sort of left over a little bit are diesel, which there is some requirement for decreasing diesel emissions through time, but that's overlaid against a general population increase. And same story with natural gas and propane. So that's mostly building emissions, as we saw. And so there are laws coming in that are requiring more efficient buildings to be built in the future. But the buildings that exist will continue to exist. So that natural gas band of your emissions is the sort of lion's share of your leftover emissions after all these other regulatory effects have come into play. And then there's a little bit, waste processing. We don't really have any emissions laws that are going to affect waste processing emissions, so that just keeps on growing with your population.
Okay.
Any other questions?
5:30.
Yeah, it's 5:30.
So are we?
I think we're good.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I'm sure everybody is ready to go home. I just want to, can we quickly just talk a little bit about the next steps?
Yes.
The next steps are to use, so the next slide, please. Okay, so now we have to identify where we need to act and figure out what we can do to draw down those remaining emissions, right? And then incorporate that into our planning goals and policies. So the next slide is just that forecast slide again, but I just want you to focus on, okay, so where does action need to happen? So the state is requiring Avista to reduce their electricity emissions. But meanwhile, we can be reducing our building energy usage, increasing efficiency. You can reduce your diesel emissions through different diesel products that are coming on the market. There's renewable diesel that's going to be increasingly available. You can think about, and you're in such a good position as a small and quickly growing community to really design your future to be one in which you can actually reduce VMT. Oh my God, you're in like a really good position for that. And then also, policies that support the EV transition, putting chargers. I know that there are already policies in place that are going to require that. So supporting those. Clean electricity, this is things like more solar, and also, how does Avista interact with your solar panel? Policies like that. Reducing reliance on natural gas, right? There's all sorts of heat pumps and things like that that can be used instead of and in conjunction with natural gas to reduce that natural gas usage. And then finally, reducing reliance on passenger vehicles, right? That's how you arrange your town. That's how you arrange your public transit. That's active modes, stuff like that. So these are all the kinds of policies that we will be talking about in the weeks and months to come.
Awesome.
Yeah. Any more questions? Thank you so much for this really enlivening talk.
Thank you. You did a great job of explaining a really complicated topic. And I wonder if you could hang on for just a little bit for our next agenda item. We are going to be talking about the climate engagement plan. And I just wanted to make sure that to see if anyone had any questions on that for you.
Okay, I'm here.
Okay, let's move on to the climate engagement plan.
Mr. Chairman, can we just make a note that Dale joined us at 5:30, 5:27.
Thank you.
Apologizing when I got some notifications.
So the next slide, please. Or if you could go back to my presentation, I'm sorry. The next item up for consideration is
The climate engagement.
engagement plan. So we really don't have a presentation for you on
Didn't
this.
we agree that Dale was going to be in charge of the whole thing? Did we do?
I think so.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, you're here.
Touche.
So
Lisa, do we have time to address this part of the agenda?
we can skip over housing update, but we need to address the engagement plan. If you're ready, and as I said, we don't have a presentation. Amy's already presented to you. You've seen this before. You've had an opportunity to look at it. We wanted to give you the opportunity, if you had questions, to ask of Beth regarding the engagement plan.
I have a question, but it's not for Beth.
Okay. Is it for me?
It probably is for us, yes.
Okay. Fair enough. Just ask a question.
Page 12, halfway through the page, under facilitated workshops. The outreach team will host a total of 6 2.5-hour workshops. Why are we trying to go to 2.5 hours per workshop? Unless there's some number of minutes that we're going to be doing this. Page 12, halfway down the page, just above resiliency.
I think that's a good question.
Yeah,
I would agree.
I
that
can
our-
tell you that, and you were there at the, there is no way that we're going to get the public to stay around for 2.5 hours. In fact, we need to make sure that our 21st meeting is shorter than our first town hall. And there's already been discussion with the council about how that could be done. So if we want to have people come, we're not going to get them to commit to 2.5 hours of anything. I don't care what time or what day it is, we'll bore them to death. So
I
if
would
we're going to
agree.
do this, I would say we make it, the goal would be an hour to an hour and a half. And that's with the idea that we have people come in for half an hour, look at something, and then have an hour to do questions and answers, but 2.5 hours is, in my opinion, an unreachable target.
But I wouldn't disagree. I think 1.5 hours is probably a good target.
Okay,
Um,
that's the only question I have.
And you, again, certainly if the commission agrees with that, somebody could make a motion to change that within the public engagement plan.
I'll wait until.
I'm sorry? Beth, hello?
Hi, I just wanted to note that those workshops are not not designed to be for the general public, but for the experts to help us really get to problem solving, how we can apply these policies in Liberty Lake, right? So the goal of those workshops are to really get the people that know to share with us their knowledge, so that we can incorporate that into the plan. So it's not really just like a random assortment of interested citizens. So when we have done this in other communities in the past, we try to keep them very focused on specific topics and get a lot of good, basically good local opinions and advice and like deep knowledge about how things need to happen in the community. So that's why those workshops are set at 2.5 hours, because honestly, they go by so fast. And by the end, everybody's like, oh no, I had so much more to say. So that's why. And so an hour and a half can be a quite tight squeeze for really getting down to brass tacks and like understanding the knowledge that those community partners have to give us. So that's my little plug for slightly longer.
Other comments?
Yeah, I'd like to see who's going to participate.
Well, so if you look above, the intent is that these be focus groups, including government officials, community members, local
I read the
businesses.
words. I was looking for names. Who's going to be there?
Oh, I don't think that has been completely defined
It
yet.
hasn't been fleshed out yet.
No.
I mean, yeah, maybe it could be a couple hours depending upon who's going to be there and what they're going to do.
Right, and some
But
of this is for the
Point
sub,
is, yeah, it's not like a general public kind of round and have coffee, but, resiliency.
right, no, it's gonna be more subject matter experts.
On that note, I would question, you're looking for 12 different community partners on page 13, halfway down the page. That seems like a pretty heavy ask to get 12 community partners for 6 meetings. Are they the same partners?
No, it's not the same partners, right? So the idea is that we get the experts in those segments to give us their expertise.
And again, we put a cap on that to include up to 12 people because we wanted to make sure that the groups were manageable in size. And I love to tell the story of the 26-person landfill siting committee that I worked with in upstate New York. Loads of fun. Not very effective. So again, we want to limit, we want to have people with the knowledge and the expertise.
Yeah, I'm
But
just
at the same time, we also need to keep it at a manageable number.
looking at the desired outcomes. You're really looking for a resiliency plan to come out of these workshops.
Yes.
So the people that are going to be attending these workshops presumably have the knowledge and the authority
Yes.
to
So,
commit to these plans.
yeah, so just to throw out some names that we have kicked around as an example.
Yes.
Spokane Regional Clean Air Agency, SRTC. So there are partner agencies that also have goals And we're trying to align our policies and our resiliency plan with the planning that's happening with other jurisdictions and other agencies around the room. There also may be some science experts and people who really are more tuned into some of these. It may be some of the question about partner agencies. Could Liberty Lake Water and Sewer District be a partner? Yeah, they could be. They have some stake and they are a generator. Could we have some of the businesses, like a Huntwood who generates a lot of energy, having those types of conversations about what are things that you see that you may want to accomplish? How can we, having the conversations with these,
Joe Q Public is going to be part of this, or probably not?
it could be, we could have community members be part of it. I mean, certainly we're going to have engagement around it, yes, absolutely. Again, the intent is to try and get a variety of different perspectives.
What we don't want is try to out-expert the expert. So as long as we can bring experts and maybe someone from Olympia, maybe if you can get someone from Olympia to come down and was its representative of the state, so that we are getting a full breadth of information and it's not just fluff. I appreciate your slide presentation, Beth. But on top of that, we need the nuts and the bolts to be given to us. So if we try to do it, we're not equipped to do it. We're not ready. We're not expert enough. But if we can get those folks that you're talking about to come, we're also learning something because we're going to be advising the council and the mayor and everybody else. So I don't want to say the more the merrier because too many is too many, right? But and how many is too many? Well, they said about 12 at maximum. Let's see, perhaps we could vote on, let's see how the first one goes. And then from that, we make a decision on perhaps minimizing. So we could vote about, we'll allow the first one to be 2.5 hours. And then should that not be fruitful, what do you say about that?
Well, what I would say is that this is a guideline for what we want to accomplish. Yes, of course, it's going to be a living document. We're going to adjust as we go. And some groups may need 2.5 hours. There may be other groups that it makes more sense if when we do a meeting with community members or with students, or as the case may be, we would of course scale what we're doing to the target audience. Is that fair, Beth?
Yeah, and if we're talking about these facilitated workshops, like those, the target audience is really getting information from your local experts that can help inform the development of the policies and can be like, that won't work because blah, blah, blah. Oh, I know, we tried to do that before and that fell through because blah, blah, blah. And oh, did you know, you get so many rich information there when you get the people that are on the ground doing it. So that is the goal of those workshops. There is other stuff that's reaching out to students and the public and things like that, which will be in a totally different kind of form.
Other questions, comments?
One quick question on the same, in the middle of page 13. Each workshop will include an equity and economic development advocate. Is that one person or is that several persons? Is that a staff member? Who is that?
Yeah, sometimes it depends on the city. It depends on who you have. If you have an equity person on your staff that has their, like, understands the lay of the land, that's the kind of person that we would want. Sometimes that's the head of Chamber of Commerce for the economic development, or it's your economic development person for your city. So it will depend on who we can get, basically.
So it is one person that will be there for all of the workshops.
Well, we're gonna have a climate planning advisory team, the CPAT. And that is one of the rules that we have to fill in that. And so it may be the person who sits on the CPAT and is in that role. We may have, I can actually see us having two different people, one that's more economic development oriented and one that's more equity oriented. But again, we'll have to see how that team, that's our next big lift after the kickoff, is to really try and fill out that CPAT.
My comment is that's a huge load to put on anybody. I mean, an enormous load. So just for what that's worth.
Comment. Have, one is a comment, another is a question. On page 13, what is a story map?
Oh, that's basically a website.
What?
It's a website.
It's an interactive website.
Yeah.
It's a specific product from ArcGIS where you can embed maps and surveys and detailed sub-stories that people can take a deeper dive into and whatnot. It's a very effective tool.
Storymap.com or?
No, it's not a .com. It's we create it. It's we create it with ArcGIS.
The second part is that logo that you've developed, I think is superb.
Thank you.
When you take a look at the screen, it makes me smile just by virtue of seeing that sunshine.
That's all Lance. Oh, and Amy.
Good job. Good job.
Other comments, questions?
Any other comments or questions?
I just, I had a couple of things underlined here that I was unsure of, I'm not clear about. And maybe as things evolve, I'll get a better idea of it, but this point, it was just on page 2 where he talked about the inventory for the GH, for greenhouse gas. And talk about actions that will aim to prioritize reductions that benefit overburdened communities. I just, what is that? What is that?
So I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
So here's a great example that you may not think about. So senior citizens that are living on a fixed income, they may be more vulnerable to excessive heat because even if they have air conditioners, they may not be willing to turn them on because of the cost. And so it's trying to dig in and understand who the vulnerable communities or community members are and to assess their vulnerabilities. Another great example would be the folks who live in Guardian Angels. We also have some lower income apartments, and we have some folks who live in a mobile home subdivision that probably have more significant potential impacts to things. There's also areas that are more significant, more vulnerable to things like wildfire because of their proximity to the wild urban interface lands. These are things that are required by commerce for us to specifically address.
Okay.
Other questions, comments? You want to go to the housing update?
Well, I was hoping that we could get a motion to make a recommendation to city council on this, or if you've got some revisions that you need to do to this is a deliverable that we, and by the way, when we deliver our deliverable, we'll actually get some dollars that can actually help us fund this this engagement.
I move.
Commissioner Garcia, you move to accept the plan as is.
I move to accept the plan as is, and we'll flesh out a lot as we get into it. Than to leave it on the table to have to come back and revisit it again. To have to eventually put it forward again, you know? The train's gonna leave the station. We don't wanna be the last ones out. Let's see what we can do. Where it gets us.
Is there a second?
I'll second. It's a start.
Any more discussion on this?
Yeah, I'll just say this. This is a legislative mandate. This is part of that equation. That's the only reason why I'm voting for it.
Agreed.
Well, and I think we need to pass along the idea that this is a living document and it may get modified as we go, like you have suggested on the meeting times. So I think when it's presented, make sure they understand that it is a living document and will most likely change as we go. But we will make sure they know of every change.
Yeah.
So there's been motion seconded. Any other discussion? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you.
Thank you all. So we will, if, given the late hour, we will defer housing until the November meeting. We're hoping to bring Beth back, or Parametrics back, the team back to deal with, the, resiliency piece, in December. I believe that was December, wasn't it?
It was November 19th.
Oh, okay, November 19th. Okay, yeah, so we will have them back for that. We will also be covering housing, at least the first initial scratch of the surface.
What is it? What is the housing? What is it?
The housing element,
No, it says housing update. If time.
Yeah.
What is it?
so I wanted to go through what the population projection is,
I thought you
what they
didn't have that.
allocate. We do have the population projection. We've made progress on the allocation. And I'm going to talk about how we're going to move forward with that, even though we know that the allocation may change somewhat just because we have to. And so
Later.
but I do want to bring you up to speed up on it. I will say that we'll be touching on this a little bit, in the kickoff meeting also. So you'll get the Cliff Notes version in the kickoff meeting.
So, to be, official with this, could I get a motion to move?
Yeah, I motion to approve.
Moving it to November.
moving it to November.
Is there a second?
Okay.
All in favor? Opposed? Thank you. We'll move on to citizen comments. Do we have any citizens online? No.
So Beth, thank you so much for your help, getting this, getting us, talking about this.
Thank you all. This was a really good discussion. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for your time and expertise. We appreciate it.
Yeah.
Beth,
Thank you.
I'm gonna be calling you.
All right.
So we move to the secretary's report.
Secretary's report, yeah, so, we have a flyer in your packet on the comp plan kickoff. I think, Amy, do we have some extra flyers that we can ask you?
You put them over
for?
on the table for us.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so if you wanna take them around to businesses, Lance has been doing a really great job of getting that out to businesses and around the community. If you wanna spread the word with your HOAs, that would be great. It is the 21st at 7 p.m. at the golf course. Our plan is that we're gonna have about 15-minute open house with stations and some engagement activities. We'll be doing the presentation and then we'll have 15 to have with opportunity, lots of opportunities for comments. 15 to 20 minutes with the stations again at the end of the meeting or however long. It's going to be from 7 to we're hoping to be done by 8:30, but it could go on until 9 o'clock if people want to hang around and talk, and they may. So there's that. I also have
So you're looking for commitment for members to be there,
well, again, this
or is
was,
it mandatory that we be there?
it's not mandatory that you be there, but we would certainly encourage you to be there. I think it's going to be a lot of it, you will have heard a lot of it, but we do that, I mean, that we're
Okay, we'll
doing
be
more
there.
work.
Be there, we'll be
okay.
there.
All right. But again, please don't feel like you have to. The tentative, also I wanted to talk about tentative calendar for 2025. And this, by the way, that going back to there's two things that I have to kind of have a better handle on, and I will certainly after the scale meeting in the first week in December. And that's the calendar. I'm going to be putting together a work program, a schedule for Planning Commission. We got a lot of ground to cover next year, and so I wanted to ask the Planning Commission if you would be willing to commit to 2 days per month. And if I assume that if we already have the meeting on the second Wednesday, so I was thinking that it made sense the second and fourth Wednesday, but I'm open to other suggestions, and if there's any dates that don't look like they work, I was trying to be sensitive about things like holidays and whatnot.
Well, would we have an agenda for each one?
So I am going to come up with a schedule for what we're going to be doing on each of these meetings.
Yeah, okay.
It may move around a little bit, because based upon just the volume that we have to get through, and we're gonna have to be, and you guys aren't the only ones, Parks and Arts Commission is gonna be having a lot of fun too, and we've got a lot of things that are happening.
Engagement too.
Yeah.
Anybody have an objection to twice a month?
No
We got a
objection.
lot to do, and a lot of people are counting on us to get it done, so if you do have any reservations, just let us know.
So I'm not necessarily asking for a vote on this, but I did want to present something to you, and I'll try and give a little bit more detailed schedule for you in terms of what I think we might be trying to cover in each meeting. I promise you, if we don't have something that we need to be doing, that we can always just decide not to have that second meeting, but I think that I've got enough ground to cover with all of you that.
And can you be sure that we have materials ahead of time? And so if there's PowerPoint presentations and things, we don't have people reading us PowerPoint. If we
Yes.
can't prepare for it, then
Where we can. Now, we got this at noon today, so.
I know, I'm just saying, that if you want to maximize the efficiency of those meetings, then give us we can look at it at home.
Absolutely, absolutely. We will indeed do that. I wanted to just mention that we have 4 members whose terms are expiring. All have expressed their interest in being reappointed. I'm waiting for, I think, Jean, you're the only one I haven't gotten the application from at this point. Okay, perfect. Okay, perfect. I will, it's too late to get you on for the council meeting on October 15th, so we can get you on the November meeting, the first meeting in November for reappointments. The mayor's has already made the statement that there's no need to interview, that we need continuity going into this. So and I want to thank you all for your willingness to sign up for more fun.
The new commissioners have badges so that when they go to meetings, they can be identified. Most of us don't. And we make sure we have some of those.
I thought
We do not.
Some of you got them today, I
Yep,
noticed.
right there. They're very.
Where?
Well,
Actually,
so I will talk to, so let me get a list right now. Who does not have an ID? So Tom, Jim, who else?
My name is misspelled.
I can't find them.
Well, you know what's interesting about that is that I gave her the spelling and she said, oh, I was given the wrong spelling. It's, and so it can't,
we don't need to take a lot of time
The
on this.
last name is perfect.
Is there a photo on it?
Mhm.
Oh, shit.
Okay.
Your fault.
But you can give that back to me and I will just give it to her and tell her what the correction is.
Okay, we move on,
Wait, so everybody else does have a name badge?
Full transparency, I misplaced mine.
Okay, then we'll order you another one. Okay,
Can I provide my own picture?
what?
I'll give you a picture of him.
agenda items for November.
Yeah, so the agenda items for November, we've already talked about. We are going to be doing the resiliency piece and we're gonna be talking about housing and hopefully I'll have a little bit more information to share with you then. And if we must, we'll kick it to December because where I should have I am working on the land capacity analysis right now, so but we won't be able to finalize it until they adopt the numbers. But if the numbers change, I'll still be able to adjust it. But anyhow, I wanted to kind of give you the first half of that process, what we're doing, so that when I have the full analysis for you to review, that it's not coming out of left field for you. And the last thing that I wanted to firm up is for design review committee members. Joe's gonna be out of town next week, but
Me too.
No, I'm just Monday,
oh, just Monday?
yeah,
So you could make Wednesday work?
Tuesday or Wednesday, either one.
Okay, and Troy said he could make Wednesday work, so.
I can't.
You can't, okay. So, okay, if Wednesday, then I will send out that invitation, and that's the reason why we have alternates on this.
Yeah. Any planning commissioner reports? Oh,
I
sorry.
do have one last question. Would someone like to report to city council at Tuesday's council meeting? Or,
This next Tuesday?
yeah,
Someone like to do it? Get some publicity for yourself? In case you might be running for office or anything? The 15th, correct?
it is the 15th, that's correct.
If no one else will do it, then I'll do it.
Thank you, Joe.
Yes, ma'am. October 15th. Any other planning commissioner reports? I will entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Is there a second? All in favor?
Aye.
We did it with 2 minutes to spare.
We're good.
Feel like I can
Thank
always
you,
count on you
everyone.
for that motion.
Thank you.